Two former Prime Ministers, Tony Blair and John Major, are calling for a referendum on Britain's Brexit deal to give people a say on access to the single market. Both argue that there is a credible case for a second vote. In a magazine interview, Tony Blair said it can be stopped if the British people decide that, having seen what it means, the pain, gain, cost benefit analysis doesn't stack up. Adding, why wouldn't you keep your options open? Why wouldn't you say, we took this decision, we took it before we saw what its consequences are, now we see its consequences, we're not so sure. So, should Britain have a second referendum on our membership of the EU, and in particular the single market? Joining us now to discuss this is Labour MP Geraint Davies, who agrees with another referendum. He joins us from Cyprus via Skype. Also joining us live from Westminster is Bill Cash, the Conservative MP, who is against a second vote. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen. So Bill Cash, why are you against a second vote? Do you think that the public, given the information we have now, particularly given the autumn statement this week, might have changed their minds and might think, you know what, we know a bit more now, we'd think differently?
Well, first of all, we've had a referendum and we're not going to have a second one. The Prime Minister's made that clear and she's completely right. The fact remains that over a week ago, 68% said they wanted to leave the EU. That's up from 52% in the referendum itself. The referendum was clear-cut. There was a majority in favour of leaving the European Union, and people like Tony Blair and John Major simply don't get it. In fact, Tony Blair himself promised a referendum and then he didn't give us one. So for practical purposes, these people are past failures.
Geraint Davies, let's put that to you. Tony Blair and John Major just don't get it. And actually more people now than at the time of the referendum want to see us out of the EU.
Well, I don't think that's true after the autumn statement. I think the silent majority is saying they're not going to get what they were promised. They're going to be worse off by £1,000 of debt. Their incomes have been cut by 5% by inflation. And they want to have the last say on the deal. My pledge is that we should try and allow the people to have the final word on the deal, not for that deal to be decided behind closed doors, because it's simply not what people were promised. And this is a big decision and we should put it back to the people.
Bill Cash, I mean, when it came to the vote back in June, we didn't really know what we were voting for, did we?
Oh, yes,
and actually, does anybody know what we were voting for? David Davis, this week in Strasbourg, accused by the EU of not even understanding what Brexit means.
Absolutely not. The fact is that people did understand, and there were 62% in my constituency said that they wanted to leave, and the majority was significant. But you know something... But
wanted to leave in order to have what kind of deal with the EU?
Well, if we go back to what you were just saying about the autumn statement and the Office of Budget Responsibility and then the Institute of Fiscal Studies, I think they're called, who are heavily subsidised, by the way, by the EU and the EU institutions, the fact is that the people of this country made a decision and they got it right, because it's about who governs Britain. They wanted to be able to govern themselves. And what follows from that is that we're going to go through a process, but we're also going to have a repeal bill to repeal the European Communities Act 1972, and we're then going to be able to govern ourselves and have a proper democracy back. That's what it's all about. We're not going to be governed by a two-tier Europe largely dominated by Germany. That's what this is really all about, and it's about making sure that the British people have the right to decide on the government they want for themselves. And Tony Blair and John Major are living on another planet.
Geraint Davies, I mean, we had a full and fair democratic vote. Are these two out-of-touch politicians trying to subvert the will of the people?
Well, the people were promised £350 million a week for the NHS. In fact, it's going to cost 300 million in cost to them instead. They were basically sold a pup. They've been misled. And people thought they were going to be better off, basically. They'd have money back. But instead, they're going to have a cuts of something like £1,000 in the future, plus the inflation cuts. We've been told pensioners now will be cut up to 2020. This isn't what people voted for. And people have the right to have a final vote on the deal on the table, not some sort of destination unknown, which is sort of progressed by sort of Brexit fundamentalists like
Well,
Bill Cash.
I've
People have a proper say on the deal on the table, and it's their deal, and not just to be done in private rooms by Bill and his mates.
Well, could I just add to that, just one point? If you actually look at what's happened with Nissan, GlaxoSmithKline, what we've just heard from Jaguar, what we've heard from one company after another, they want to do deals with the United Kingdom.
We want to leave Britain if we go ahead, because we won't be a platform into the EU. There's a sort of blank check. People didn't vote for a blank check and at any cost. They aren't fundamentalists like you, Bill. They're people who want the best for their families, and now they know it's worse for their families. They should have a final say on the final destination.
Can I ask you, Geraint Davies, when you want that final say to happen, though? Because we've heard from the Irish Prime Minister, Enda Kenny, today, that it will be impossible to reach a deal between the UK and EU in 2 years. And he's talking about a transition arrangement which may last over 3 years.
Well, first of all, the Article 50 shouldn't be triggered until the end of next year, because as soon as we do that, we give in our EU membership, which means we've got no negotiating power, and the 27 EU states will decide what they want to give us, which will probably be bad because they don't want anyone else to leave. In terms of the negotiations after Article 50, as I say, we've got no power. So the negotiations need to occur before Article 50, with the understanding of the EU that we'll have a referendum on the deal, so they've got an incentive to negotiate.
Well, I can only reply to that if you look at the trade deficit between ourselves and the EU, it runs at £62 billion a year with the other 27 member states. That speaks for itself. We have a global surplus with the rest of the world of over 30 billion. It went up by about 10 billion last year alone. The bottom line is that the Brexit arrangements are good for Britain. It's about returning, as the British people have said, to the people governing themselves through general elections, and people can decide at general elections whether or not they want a government or they want to be able to govern themselves. And I'll say one last thing, and that is that with the EU, you don't govern yourself, because all the laws that come pouring in come from Brussels and decided by majority vote of other countries.
OK, Bill Cash, Geraint Davies, that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.